there, my name is Irene, and in this video we're going to be talking everything about textures. Now, the context of this video is going to be its application for Sketchup, but I want to be very clear that when it comes to textures, this is a universal concept that applies to basically any 3D modeling software that uses images to drive the appearance of materials. So let's get to it. Now, in my previous video, I already went over what are textures. Basically, when we talk about textures, it is images that repeat over a surface driven by the material. So the material is the property, the texture is the image itself. So in the context of SketchUp, PNGs and JPEGs can be used as material textures, and you can control their dimensions, their aspect ratio, their opacity, and even their color. But what I want to focus on here is a little bit more specific to how we approach textures and how can we decide if an image is good enough to be used as a texture. So the first thing that we need to understand is that when it comes to textures, in the context of interior design, they're basically going to break down into three categories. The first one is going to be textures that repeat, but that is okay. Now, these are usually man-made materials. So think about something like, for example, this tile that you see here. This is a man-made tile. You can see that the original sample has only 4 tiles and it repeats, and you can see that it repeats, but that's the way that tile works. So that's perfectly fine. Other cases of this is going to be wallpapers or fabric with patterns, mostly man-made things. Then we have things that repeat, but we don't want to see this repetition. So you're going to see this most commonly with natural materials. So think about, for example, grass, think about sand.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Think about water, but even something like a wooden floor. Because the idea here is, yes, I understand that the wooden floor is made out of slats and they're all the same wood and then it repeats. But the thing is that because the material is natural wood, each slat is going to have a slight variation on pattern and knots and color. This is why cheap quality vinyl flooring is so bad at looking like actual wooden floor, because they have a very limited array of patterns and you can very quickly see like, ah, yes, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy are the same thing. So these kind of materials, they have to repeat because they cover a pretty large surface, but you don't want the viewer to realize that it's an image that just keeps on repeating. The third kind of texture is going to be textures that don't repeat. These are going to be basically cases where you have a single image that is exactly the size of the geometry that goes in. Good example of this is, for example, if you have an area rug or if you have a picture. This is an image per geometry, end of the story. So once we understand what is the nature of the kind of images that we are going to be having to use in 3D modeling, the next step is going to be searching for those images, because the thing is that not every image works as a texture. So let's carry on with this wooden floor as an example. I find that it's a really good one because there's a few rules that you can use as a guideline to figure out if an image will be good as a texture for your 3D model. So I'm just going to go on the internet. We're going to keep it pretty casual. I'm going to later talk about like what are the best places to search for these images, but let's start with a simple search. So let's say that I want to replace that ugly wooden floor with my own wooden floor. So I'm just going to go on Google and I'm going to search for wood floor, enter. And I'm going to go images, and you're going to get a bunch of different images. So I'm going to ignore these products here on the top. We will get back to them later. So you get a bunch of images, but you cannot just use these images, right? So there's a few things to consider when selecting a texture. Rule number 1 is that the image should contain only the material in question. So all of these images here that show the floor in a room may look great, like the floors themselves may be wonderful, but I cannot use them because there is stuff in this image that will repeat along with them. You might be like, well, Irene, that's super obvious. That is literally not a picture of the floor. That is a picture of a room. But the thing is that, like, if you understand this, even if you get a picture that looks like it might be really good, if that image has something else, it's going to ruin the whole effect. So let's see if I can find a good picture here. Okay, this isn't perfect, but it's good enough. It is a JPEG, perfect. So I'm just going to save it on my desktop. And remember, if you want to, you can create a new material or you can replace the existing texture within that material. I personally prefer to just replace the texture. So I'm just going to come here to this folder and say, I'm not going to use that wooden floor. Instead, I'm going to use my new wooden floor, which is this guy here. Okay, let me do some quick fixes to this image. And you can immediately see what the problem is. Even if the image would be perfect and it is almost entirely floor, there's still this guy here coming out of nowhere, coming out of left field, and then it's going to repeat. So imagine that instead of this, it's maybe like a pair of shoes on the floor or something like that. Anything that is in the image will repeat. So you want to make sure that the image only contains the material in question, okay? So that's rule number 1. It has to be just the material in that image. Rule number 2 is that it should be a straight-on picture. So what do I mean? Well, by that I mean that you do not want something like this. This picture is a very nice floor, nice level of detail, but it's not going to work because the thing is, I'm going to save it and then, I think I need to use my snipping trick again. The problem here is that if you think about the way that the image is applied to the surface is flat and the image is applied flat. So if the image itself has a perspective, has a distortion, and the picture is at an angle, that angle will cause a discrepancy between the way that you would expect that material to behave and the way that it actually does. So if I put this guy here, once again, let me try and make it as nice as possible. But as you can see, it's not really working because it's like this is at an angle and then here is at another angle and then the angle comes here and goes. So whenever you are searching for an image to be used as a texture, it should be a straight on picture. And the best way that I explain this is sometimes when you take mood board pictures for like your material display, it looks really nice if you take it right from the top. Like let's say you have your tray of materials and the camera is right on top. So you get that straight shot. That is how you want your materials to look. Perfectly straight. That is rule number 2. Rule number 3 is that there should be no light variations. There should be no highlights, no reflections, no shadows. So, okay, let's look for an example of this. Okay, so that took me a while. This one here is a very good bad floor. The pattern is gorgeous, the picture is perfectly straight, but look what's gonna happen when I save and use this image for my texture. I'm gonna bring it here, we're gonna replace, and we're gonna put this little guy instead. I think it was this guy. This ugly line is what you will get. I'm gonna make it smaller so you can see it repeat. Oof, horrendous. See? So this is the problem. And this one is really subtle. Like it takes some experience to be able to look at an image at first glance and be like, no, there's highlight, low light issues with this image. Because basically what's happening is that in real life, these highlights and lowlights are going to be the response of actual natural light within the environment. So things casting shadows, light hitting that surface. But if you have these kind of like sharp cut where you have shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow, light, it just looks unnatural. Now, there are scenarios where we actually want to use this to create certain visual effects, but by default, this is not something that you desire. So your images should not just be flat in terms of like the position of the camera, but they should also be flat in terms of lighting. Very even lighting, no highlights, no shadows. The final rule is going to be pay attention to the scale. Basically, keep into consideration how large of a surface you are going to be covering versus what is the size of the image sample. So for example, if I select, I think there was a pretty good one down here. Where was it? Let's say, sure, let's go with this guy. It's not perfect, but it will do. So if I come here and I save this guy, basically the way that you want to think about it is, oh no, that's an LEF file. Do we have anything similar here? No, I'm gonna have to choose somebody else. Okay, so this one here. Now, this one has many other bigger problems, but let's go with this one here. Very nice pattern, very nice color, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna use the snip because once again, it is a web page image, and I'm just gonna select this one. Not gonna be too precious because these images are bad anyway, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so the problem with an image like this, I'm going to replace it here so you can see it, is going to be the scale. So the thing is that if I measure this plank here, right now, each plank is almost a foot wide. And the thing is, like, I know that like wide planks are a thing, but not like this, not like this. The planks are also a length of what, like 5. So these, like, you can see the repetition and it not doesn't look really good. So the reason for this is because you have to understand that the human brain is wired for pattern recognition. This is why we see faces in everything. It's because our brains are really good at picking up patterns. So the problem is that if you're working with an image that the sample of the material is too small, even if that image is perfectly perfect, if it repeats enough times, you will see the pattern. And this is what happens very often. I see it with outdoor renderings, so things like grass or soil, sand, water. Even when they are working with very, very good images, because the image is covering a very vast surface, it's just going to repeat so many times that you will see that pattern. So the other thing is that whenever possible, you want to try to match the size or the scale of the sample to the size or the scale of the surface that will be covered by the material. So now that we have that understanding, I'm going to show you just within this search, because then I'm going to show you that there are 2 magic words that will solve all of your problems forever. But I want to show you that just paying attention to this will yield you better results when searching for floors. So one that I have been ignoring has been this guy. So if you look at this floor here, it has all of the things that I was asking for. Number 1, it's just floor. Number 2, it's a straight up picture. Number 3, there are variations due to the color of the wood, but there are no variations in terms of highlights and shadows within the pattern. And number 4, you can see that we have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have a very large sample of planks within this simple image. So if I come here and I save this image as, and I'm going to put it here, and now we're going to replace it. Because the image itself is bigger, it means that it has to repeat less times overall. See, right now my plank is, let's just measure it here, an inch. That's really small. So let me quickly change this. It's also a little bit stretched out. So let me make it more like a 3x5. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And then let's see, how much is that? It's still really small. So let's say that we want it to be 20 feet. Let's see if I measure it again. Oops. If I measure it again, this is gonna end like there, I think 8 inches. Yeah, that's fine. Like if I measure it here, yeah, 8 inches. I'm just approximating here. Like in other cases, you want to be more precious. So you can see that like I can't even see the repetition. Like this looks pretty good, pretty straight, pretty nice, right? Now, I want to highlight something, and for that, I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. So let's say that I want it to be 10. Now, when you're working with your textures, even if you're following those 4 rules that I've mentioned, sometimes due to the nature of the image, you're going to see this. This is where my image ends and the next copy begins. And this is a problem because, again, as I was speaking earlier, this is a material where I don't want to be able to see where the image ends and where the image begins again. So with those 4 rules, you can find much better images, but there are 2 magic words that will streamline this search process, and they are texture and seamless. So I wasn't joking when I said that these are universal concepts. The word texture is a universally understood word to mean an image that is used as a texture for a material for 3D modeling. And the thing is that once you understand that this entails all 3D modeling, it's a pretty big industry. It's not just interior design. It's not just construction. You have the video game industry. You have advertisement and graphic design. Anything that works with 3D modeling ends up doing these same searches. So basically what ends up happening is that you can put the word texture at the end of any material and you will get a version of that material that has been designed to work as a texture in the context of 3D modeling. So as you can see, now I'm getting a much nicer selection. Almost all of them are straight. Almost all of them are like even with the lighting, but it is still not super perfect. You're still gonna have some images that you're gonna look at and you're gonna be like, really? That's a texture? Okay. So this is where the second magic word is gonna come in, which is seamless. So seamless is even more complex because a seamless texture is an image that has been digitally, artificially created to work specifically as a texture for a material. And the secret of a seamless image is the fact that the beginning and end are the same. So it has an even overlap, almost like a wallpaper. So for example, this wooden floor here follows all of my requirements, no other materials in the image, straight, no highlights, no shadows, proper scale, but it is also seamless, which basically means that this plank here aligns with like that little bit there. And this blank here aligns with whatever comes there. Basically, the idea is that when the material repeats, you will not be able to see where the image ends and begins. In fact, I like this guy here better for this demonstration because it goes to show that it's not even like, oh, it works because the planks are straight. It can be any pattern as long as the beginning and end match. So if I come here and I replace this guy with, what was the, oak herringbone. I think it's this one. There we go. Let me once again adjust the aspect ratio. And no. And then I think this is 12. Yeah, that's better. And then let's make it much smaller so you can actually see how it works with the repetition. See what's happening? So again, this is what I was talking about with the scale. Because I made it so small, immediately my brain is repeat, 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 repeat. Like maybe it's because I've been working in this industry for too many years and my brain immediately jumps to that. But this is why, for example, I wouldn't necessarily use this image. The sample is not big enough for my taste. But if I would tell you, I'll give you $100 if you tell me exactly where the image ends and the next repeat begins, you're not going to be able to say it because the image was digitally designed, so you cannot see where the seam is. That is why it's called a seamless image. So as you can see, there is a lot of complexity to searching for the perfect image because obviously you have all of these rules that you need to follow, but then it also has to match your design. So how do we do to find the images that will work best for our textures? Obviously, you can do what I just did here, which is go on Google and do a Google search. That isn't illegal, but the results may vary. What I like to recommend is that there are 3 different search categories that you can utilize when you are searching for images to use as textures. So my first recommendation is to go with the supplier. Basically, who is giving that material is very likely that they will have very good images of that material that can be used for 3D modeling. So for example, let's say that I want a tile. So I'm going to go, and I don't want just tile like, oh, a gray tile. I want a tile with a specific pattern, right? So what I can do is, let's say that I'm going to go to a tile store. Now I will give a caveat. Not all companies have joined us in the 21st century, especially in the field of construction. Some companies still have very sad little websites. It is just the nature of the beast, but that is constantly changing. So let's say that I'm going to go to a tile store. There's one in Toronto called Stone Tile. Let's go here. So let's say that I'm going to search for a tile. Okay. So I'm going to go here, tile, and let's search for, let's go for porcelain. And basically what you're going to see, let's choose an interesting tile. I want one with a pattern that is more than like a stone. I want something that has like a color or like a graphic pattern. So it's a little bit more visible what's going on. Okay, let's say this style here. So basically what you're going to see is that usually most companies are going to have pictures of the tile applied in a room, which is perfectly fine. This helps the viewer understand the scale of the tile, how the pattern comes together. So very handy. But then you're also going to see that they're usually going to have something like this or similar to this, which is going to be just a plain image straight on of that tile. And it's almost like they know that if they make their products easy to use in 3D modeling, it is more likely that we will select them as designers. So let's say that I'm going to choose, I don't know, let's say this guy here. See, just a perfect image of that tile. So that is option number 1. You can go directly to the suppliers. This works really well when you're searching for like very specific pattern tiles, things like wallpapers, things like fabrics, one-off items like, for example, rugs, that kind of stuff. The supplier is the best place to go. Now, let's say that you are looking for just, let's say, marble. So the thing is that, are there suppliers for marble? Yes. Is marble something that belongs to a single supplier? No. Marble is a natural material that you will be able to find all over the world. Well, not extract, but like purchase all over the world. So in these cases, going to a supplier will actually limit you because, again, depending on how modern or technology driven the supplier is, they may or may not have like a good enough to use in 3D modeling image. So in this case, is basically what you want to ask yourself is like, is this just a regular world material? If the answer is yes, then there is a better way to search for these materials, which is to go to dedicated websites. So what is a dedicated website? Well, again, when it comes to 3D modeling and materials and textures, this is an industry that goes much further than interior design or construction. So basically over the years, websites have emerged that basically just host libraries of of images to be used in 3D modeling. Now, the quality is all over the place, like with most things. Some of these websites are paid, some of them are free. I'm going to refer to two that are my favorite. Both of them you can register for free, and then it has a few limitations, or you can register a paid account and then you have like unlimited access to everything, but they are my favorite. I am not sponsored. If they would like to sponsor me, I will accept the sponsorship because I like them, but I just want to make it very clear. I recommend them because I like them. So the first one is called the Sketchup Texture Club, and this is an old but gold. It has a bunch of other stuff, but the thing that I really care about is their texture library. And basically what you can see here is that they have PBR. This is something a little bit more advanced. We will talk about PBRs when we get into photorealistic rendering. So for now, I'm going to keep it very simple. So you have architectural, material, natural elements. So let's say that we're going to go architectural. So within architectural, you're going to have bricks, buildings, concrete, decorative panels, roads, blah, 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 and 3 categories for wood. Wood floors, wood planks. Let's go for wood floors. Decorated, geometric pattern, herringbone, color parquet, dark parquet, light, medium, square, white, like so many options. Let's say that I want to go with geometric pattern just because it's a little bit bougie. And look at how many options they have. This is my favorite option whenever you're looking for something that is a little bit more generic, like you don't have a specific brand or supplier in mind. You're just thinking light oak, white plank, wood, right? Like this is not a specific brand. And again, what I really like is, for example, a place like this, a SketchUp Texture Club, you can register for free. There are some limitations. So for example, if I select a pattern, you're going to see that there is a free version and then there's a club member version. Basically, the difference is just going to be in the resolution of the image. And then when we get into photorealistic rendering, the paid account has access to photorealistic materials. But when you're getting started with SketchUp, this is going to be more than enough. So SketchUp Texture Club, huge favorite of mine. The other favorite of mine is called Polyheaven. So P-O-L-I, and then it's not heaven, it's Haven, H-A-V-E, Polyheaven. We're going to go here. This one you can also sign up for free. This one I actually really like because it's tailored both for artistic and photorealistic rendering, so it's going to come really handy later. And basically you can see that they have an entire section dedicated to textures. Now, basically what's going to happen with these guys is that you have to have a premium account to have access to like the early access materials, but then eventually all of the early access materials become available, so who cares? They also highlight the new ones, and like look at all of these materials. Like they're so beautiful and so detailed. And once again, what I really like is that all of these materials are specifically designed to be used in the 3D modeling industry. So they are seamless. They have like proper scales. Like they're just wonderful. I love Polyheaven. The only problem that I have with Polyheaven is because I have a feeling that Polyheaven is more inclined towards the like video game or advertisement or graphic design industry, not necessarily so much construction, because I find that they have some limitations with the selection when it comes to the things that I would particularly need as an interior designer, but I still very much love them, very much one of my favorites. So these two, there are many more websites. There is Turbo Squid if you have unlimited amounts of money. I don't, so I don't use it. And then the third option that I am going to recommend is the unsung hero that is Pinterest. Now, I don't know where you sit on the scale of like love towards Pinterest. I think that people have fallen off the Pinterest love train in recent years, but I personally still very much love it. And I love it for one very specific reason. For that, I'm going to come back to my SketchUp Texture Club. And the thing is that when you are looking for like very specific things, like for example, let's say that you're looking for a marble or a granite for like a slab. Let's say that you're doing kitchen countertops or something like that. The main problem that I have encountered is that places like SketchUp Club or even Polyheaven have this problem where the slabs don't necessarily behave like slabs. So what do I mean with that? Let's say that I'm going to choose this gray one here. So basically what you can see is that all of these images are slabs, or most of them are square. Now, if you know, the way that you purchase slabs for, again, countertops and walls and floor finishes is basically you buy an entire slab. And that slab tends to, one, be really, really big, and two, be rectangular. So the problem that I have with samples like these ones is that they usually tend to be, number one, they tend to be very close, and number two, they tend to be square. So what happens is that they end up repeating. And the thing is that something like a slab should not be a repeating material. That should be one of those that like you have one material, one image for the geometry, and that's it. So in these cases, I have surprisingly found that Pinterest is wonderful. Like if I come here and I search for, let's say, marble, now, very important, you want to make sure that you use the word texture at the end. The same trick will apply here. What you're going to get is these images that, see how they're like nice and long and rectangular, and usually the scale of the sample is really large? These images are perfect to use for slabs in 3D modeling. I don't know why Pinterest has on lockdown the market of like beautiful slab images, but those are just the facts. So anytime that I'm looking for stone slabs, I will go to Pinterest. I also really like Pinterest for like new trendy stuff. So for example, if I'm looking for tile patterns or textures, I find that you can find very new, trendy, interesting stuff on Pinterest. Like look at, for example, this style pattern. Like it already has some randomization included in it. It looks so nice. Or look, for example, like something like this style pattern that is already arranged. Like I really, really love Pinterest if you're looking for something really unique when it comes to tiles. Same thing with wallpapers. If you have a supplier and a specific wallpaper in mind, that's a different story. Go directly to the supplier. But if you're just looking for, let's say, like, I don't know, like a grass cloth wallpaper, I find that Pinterest works really, really well. Grass cloth wallpaper, again, texture word at the end. You can even put seamless, and you can see that it gives you very good images. I also really like Pinterest for solid color fabrics. So if you just want a fabric, you don't want like a pattern, let's say that I'm looking for a velvet, so I can go velvet texture, for example, and you're gonna get very nice images that like show, like they will work really well with the pattern. So Pinterest is like my unsung hero when it comes to searching for images to use as textures for my materials. With that, we have reached the end of this video. I hope that you liked it. I hope that you find it helpful. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to add them in the comments. If you like the video, feel free to join in. That way, anytime that I post a new video, you will receive a notification. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye!